As part of the webinar series leading to the Healthcare Advocate Summit, today we're going to talk about healthcare and security and how they come together. To make this a little bit more interesting, we're going to use a case study of a recent test I did for a hospital in the Pacific Northwest and how I hacked into that hospital in the middle of the pandemic. We're also going to talk about ways that you can protect yourself and your organization from these types of attack. My name is Matthew Miller, and I'm a Principal Security Engineer at Triaxiom Security. So, agenda. First, we're going to talk a little bit about Triaxiom Security. What are the credentials for performing this test? How does somebody get into this type of career field? Then we're going to do the case study from this hospital that I hacked into. And from that, we can take some tips and tools for you to use to protect yourself at home and at work. First, Triaxiom Security. Triaxiom Security is based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We perform penetration testing, which is essentially ethically hacking into an organization and finding the gaps in their security so that an attacker can't do that. We perform this type of testing for all different types of organizations across all different verticals, including healthcare. We also conduct security audits for things like HIPAA, PCI is for payment card industry, if you accept credit cards, etc. So this specific test was on a hospital system in the Pacific Northwest. Due to non-disclosure agreements, obviously we're not going to get into details about this particular hospital, but it's a great case study for you guys to learn different tools and techniques to protect yourself. So this was performed against a major hospital in the Pacific Northwest, and it was at the height of the pandemic. We started from outside the network, so an attacker on the internet, and our goal was to gain access to the internal network and ultimately try to take over and see if we can gain access to sensitive information such as patient data. So let's talk first about how I was able to get that initial access. So how can an attacker on the internet gain access to a hospital's network? Well, the first thing we noticed is that they had Outlook or OWA exposed to the internet. Now, this is a prime candidate for target for attackers because we know that this is most likely tied to your user accounts, and from that, it leads itself available to a password spraying attack. A password spraying attack is where we would go to LinkedIn and find as many employees of this hospital as we could find, and we try very common passwords against that. So things like summer 2020, winter 2020, etc. Now, the goal of that is to find one user with a weak password. And what we find in most large organizations is when organizations are requiring users to change their passwords every 90 days, and they're enforcing the complexity that requires you to have an uppercase, lowercase, number. The most common passwords we find are summer 2020, fall 2020, etc. The reason for that is because users are selecting their passwords that follows the seasons of the months, and it meets the complexity requirements, and again, it remembers your last 4 passwords, but by the time we get back to summer again, it'll be summer 2021 and then summer 2022, etc. And so because of this, probably in about 60% of organizations, somebody is following either the month or the season in the year as their password, and this organization was no different. This is what a password spraying attack looks like. As you can see here, we're trying a large list of usernames, A. Martin, A. Cooper, A. Ward, A. Morris, etc., with a very common password. In this exact screenshot, you can see spring 2020. Now, you can see that most of the logins are failed because we didn't guess a wrong password. The advantage of this password spraying attack is we only need to find the weakest password in the organization to gain access. Additionally, in this particular instance, you can see that we're able to enumerate valid usernames from incorrect usernames based on the time it takes the server to respond to me. So when we tried an invalid attempt, you can see there it took about 3 seconds for the server to get back to us. However, when we guessed a valid username, it took less than a second. And so because of that, we can quickly identify from the LinkedIn sources and the usernames we found, what username convention you're using, as well as how many of those users are valid. And then by the time we get to our second or third attack, we have a list of only valid usernames, just making our attack much more successful. In this particular instance, like that screenshot at the top shows, we were able to guess somebody had the password winter 2020. And so once we had logged in as winter 2020, we were able to get into the user's email. And quickly we found that users are sending sensitive emails, including patient data, over email. So how do we fix this? Well, first and foremost, this is why multi-factor authentication is so important. For those who don't know what multi-factor authentication is, consider when you log into your bank account. When you're trying to log into your bank account, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to type in your username and password, and then it's going to prompt you to enter a phone code that it's sent to your code, either a one-time code or a push notification to your phone, etc. And so that is multi-factor authentication. It's using multiple factors to authenticate to the application. In this instance, a username and a password, as well as a user has to have your phone. So that's something you have, a phone, and something you know, a password. And that combined is multi-factor authentication. Now, the reason why that is so important is even if we were able to guess a password, we did not have that user's phone, so we wouldn't have been able to get into their email. Finally, we want to increase our password strength. So what we find in most organizations, and Winter 2020 is a very common password, but it's not actually Winter 2020 every time. There's a lot of people are choosing passwords that are based off of their kid's name and date of birth, dictionary words, especially sports teams in the local area. We actually see a lot of curse words. And what users are doing in kind of this cartoon is a very famous cartoon that explains this, is users are trying to make it more difficult for attackers by changing the O's to zeros, by changing the A's to @ symbols, the S's to dollar signs. And that doesn't make it that much harder for an attacker. We quickly have rules that we do that will just transform our word list into all of these different common substitutions. Maybe it messes with the capitalization and adds numbers to the end, etc. And all you're really doing is making it harder for you to remember, and it's not making it too much harder for an attacker. So instead, what we preach at TriAxiom Security is to use a passphrase. A passphrase is essentially a sentence. Take a sentence that's personal to you. I have a yellow dog named Spot. Great, make that your password. Keep the spaces, keep the capital S for Spot, maybe add an exclamation point at the end. That's a very personal password that is not hard for you to remember, but it's over 20 characters long, and it's going to be very hard for an attacker to be able to guess that. Quick note on that is you don't want to choose common movie quotes or Bible verses, etc., because we have dictionary lists again that have these common phrases, and those are going to be one of the first things we try. So again, what we recommend is take a sentence that's personal to you and set that as your password. Keep the spaces, keep the normal capitalization, etc., and then that's very easy for you to remember, very hard for me to guess. Last but not least is password managers. So you can see in the bottom right there, really 95% of the passwords is you don't need to memorize it. So what we recommend is using a password manager. A password manager is a vault that stores all of your sensitive passwords in a very secure way such that you don't even know it. So right now, if I had a gun to my head and somebody asked me, what is your bank account password? I wouldn't know it. What I do know is I know my password to get into my password manager, but I don't, and in my password manager is that password. When I need to log into my bank, I authenticate to my password manager, and then it auto-fills it into the browser for me, or I can copy and paste it over, etc. And because of that, I don't even know the passwords for most of my sites. At TriAxiom Security, we use LastPass, but there's a lot of different password managers out there, and they're all great. They all have different kind of interoperability. The reason why I like LastPass is because I have it on my phone as well as my computer, so I can kind of keep those back and forth. And they're really great for setting a unique password, even a randomly generated 25-character password across every different site that nobody's going to be able to guess, and I have very little concerns about that. Now, when we're talking about password managers, though, it's important to note that that's the keys to your kingdom. That is the most important thing. If you're storing your passwords in there and somebody happens to get access to that, they have access to all of your different sites. As such, we need to make sure we're protecting that password manager really well. So, we want to have a very strong password. Again, use a passphrase for that. We also want to make sure we enable multi-factor authentication so that an attacker has to, 1, have my password, and 2, also have my phone to gain access to that device. Next, let's talk about social engineering and how we use social engineering to gain access to this hospital network. So first, when we're doing awareness training and we talk about social engineering, what we find is that most users are still picturing the Prince of Nigeria who has a bunch of money who wants to send to you in order to gain access to your bank account information, etc. In reality, nobody's going to fall for that. The victim rates for obviously somebody's still making money, that's why we still see them, but the victim rates for an attack like that is extremely low. Instead, your organization is most likely to be targeted by a more specific social engineering attempt, really kind of tailored for your organization. So let's look at the campaign we used for this particular hospital network and kind of take some lessons learned from that. So first, we went to Google Domains and we purchased a domain. In this case, we bought the hospitalname.training. But as you can see here, you go to Google Domains and you can buy all sorts of different extensions for you to use in your domain. Now, what we find is that some users, when they see a hospital.training network, they're thinking that this is an internal network, and it actually makes them trust it more. In reality, it's time to educate users and make sure people know that you can just go to Google Domains and buy this. Even your company name, followed by .video, .portal, .training, etc. Now, this kind of shows you some rough costs. I would note that these are even higher than what we would pay for this. So, hospital is a very sought after name, but if we were to buy, your specific hospital names, .training, in this particular instance, it costs us about $12 a year to purchase that. The next thing we did is we found a portal from the outside of the internet. And again, this could be that OWA we talked about earlier. This could be a SharePoint login or hospital portal, whatever it may be. And we're going to actually just copy that website, make it look exactly the same, maybe make a few modifications to say training portal instead of OWA. And again, we're going to have a login prompt there that looks just like your login. Quick disclaimer, this is, obviously not the hospital that we did here. This is just a random picture we found on Google. Hopefully there's no winter 2020 users here. The next thing we did is we registered a email address, helpdesk at this particular hospital.training. Now, that allows us to pretend that we are the help desk, and we sent the following email saying that we're setting up a new training portal. This is going to be the centralized portal for all ongoing training requirements, computer-based training and compliance. We're nearing the final stages of rollout, and part of the testing is I've been asked to reach out to a few people from each department to make sure it's going to work properly once it goes out. So again, in the 3 steps there, we redirected them to the HTTPS website. A quick note on that, just the lock in your portal icon does not necessarily mean that it is a trusted website. We were able to register a proper certificate for this website in about 5 minutes. What that is telling you, the lock in your browser is telling you, is that everything between your computer and that website is encrypted. So somebody sitting at Starbucks with you is not able to steal your password. That's a really great security control. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that end portal is a trusted system that you should enter your credentials into. So again, in this case, we sent them to https portal.thehospitalname.training. We asked them to sign in with the credentials they use on their computer every day, and then we told them, hey, you'll either get a success or error message. If you get an error message, please respond to us so that we can fix it. Here's what we see on our end. We can track exactly when the user opened the email, exactly when they clicked on the link, what browser were they using, what computer were they using, and then finally we can also track exactly what they submitted. So in this case, obviously we just did TriAxiom and a sample password, but in the particular social engineering campaign we waged, obviously we were stealing users' credentials with this. After they click that link, what the user would see is they just get redirected to a success page. This is so we don't arise any more suspicion, and they think they're compatible. We got a few people email us back, said, hey, I'm good to go, and they never reported it. So that's a great example of a phishing or email-based campaign. It's also important to know that we can do vishing, which is voice or voice phishing. And what that is essentially when we're going to do that same exact campaign, but this time we're going to combine it with a phone call as well. And so this is a tool we use that allows us to change our phone number so that your caller ID says that we're coming from any number we want. So again, using kind of Google searches, open source reconnaissance, we were able to find the email for the phone number for the help desk. We set that as ours, and then we called the victims, and again sent them that email as soon as they picked up the phone and said, hey, this is somebody from the help desk. We're setting up this new portal. I need to do it. So in that last campaign with the email only, our success rate is pretty low, somewhere around 20%. Now, every one counts, of course, but if we combine that with a phone call, that jumps up to about 80%. The reason for this is, one, when I get you on the phone, you have either two choices. One, you can directly confront me and say you're not comfortable with this, or two, and what most likely happens is people want to avoid confrontation, and so they go along with the campaign to try to get the help desk off their back. So just by adding this phone call, we're able to boost our success rates quite substantially. What happens if I open that file? In this particular campaign I just showed you, we were just trying to steal users' credentials. We have other campaigns that we use where we try to get a backdoor installed on their machine so that we can take over their computer. Let's talk about what this looks like. Maybe we will pretend to be a corporate recruiter and we'll send people from this hospital an email and say, hey, even if you're perfectly happy at your job at company X, at least look at the salary my client is willing to offer you. We will also try to add things in there to make it more familiar to the user. So you've been referred to me by multiple individuals. I'm looking for a job in the specific geographic location you are. Adding a sense of urgency. This position has to be filled in the next 2 weeks, etc. And those are just trying to entice the user to click the link and make it more personable than the standard recruiting message we all get 3 times a week and we all ignore. So once we do that, what we will do is we will attach a macro-enabled Word document to it. And so essentially what happens is when a user opens it, they'll see a job description that we custom tailored to look like it may fit them. Maybe we went to Indeed or Monster.com and found a job that looks like they might be interested in, and we copied that into a Word document. And then at the bottom, we will have a little field that says View Salary with a blank box. Under that box, it'll say you have to enable macros to view salary. When a user hits enable macros, the salary will pop up. They'll think none the wiser, but in the background, it will install a backdoor which provides us remote access to their computer. So in this particular instance, when we were able to get users to click on that and enable macros, then we had a complete control over their machine. So let's talk about some of the things an attacker can do on that system. 1, we can steal any files off your system. 2, we can upload files or malware to your system, such as ransomware. The screenshot to the right shows a common variant of ransomware. Ransomware is called ransomware because essentially the attacker is hoping that you will pay a ransom or Bitcoin or whatever. In response, they will unlock your files. So what they're trying to do is trying to lock your computer and make you pay to unlock it again. Additionally, we can take pictures with your webcam, we can record your microphone, shut down your system. Persistent connection. Persistent connection is when we're trying to tie our malware to your startup. So every time you restart your computer, it will reinitiate and call back out to us again. And so what that allows us to do is to really kind of keep a connection on your computer for months at a time. Other things we can do is we can steal passwords from memory or from your browser. One of the best advantages of a password manager is that it stores it all in an encrypted vault. This is way more secure than, for example, storing it in Google Chrome, or for example, Firefox or Internet Explorer. Those built-in browser password managers essentially are running on the same permissions you are. So if for some reason your computer gets compromised, an attacker can just quickly download the files and read all of your passwords. And so just by getting you to click on that link, now I know your password to your ADP, to your HR system, whatever it may be, and that allows an attacker really to spread their attack. Last but not least, and the most important for us to talk about, is most of the time an attacker is going to try to use your computer to attack your internal network. So it's not always just about you. In fact, most of the time it would not be just about you. What we would do is we would try to get your computer to click on that link, and now we have internal network access. And so at this point, we would be able to spread to the internal network. This is important because most organizations spend a lot of time securing their internet perimeter. You have firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, etc., that are really protecting anybody from the outside being able to get a foothold on the network. Now, when I got you to click that link, I'm a computer on the network. So I bypassed all of those controls in place and have direct internal network access, and then I'm going to spread. Specifically in the case of ransomware, like we talked about, it's not going to be very effective if I lock your computer. You're going to go to your help desk, they're going to re-image your computer, you're going to lose the pictures or documents on your computer, and but there's no way you're paying that ransom. However, if I'm able to use your computer to spread through the network, to try to elevate my permissions, to take over, to get help desk type permissions where I can gain access to every machine on the system, yeah, now I have a much bigger chance. Even better, I'm going to try to get to your backups, etc. So most of the time when we see social engineering, especially in organizations, what they're trying to do is use that as a point of entry to gain access to the rest of the network. Again, they're trying to elevate their permissions, go as far as they can, and then ransomware will hit, and then they'll steal the sensitive files and try to blackmail the company, etc. So it's important to note that even if you clicked on it, and you think it was only you, and you're too embarrassed to report it, you have to keep in mind that your computer can be used as a staging point to try to take over the rest of the network. Let's talk about how to fix this. When our first campaign that we talked about, where we were just trying to steal users' passwords using that portal, that is a case study in why multi-factor authentication is so important. If you had multi-factor authentication on, even if you entered your password into that portal and fell for it, I would have your password, but I wouldn't be able to use it anywhere where you have multi-factor authentication because I wouldn't have your phone. I wouldn't have that one-time code that gets sent to your phone to gain access to your email, to gain access to the VPN, whatever it may be. And so really that would stop the attack in its track. Additionally, it's important to understand how your organization will ask for an attack. Generally speaking, there will always be something about a social engineering attack that will kind of be a little bit different from normal. Obviously, when we're performing this attack, we don't know how the help desk sends emails. So maybe your hospital sends emails and they always have a ticket number in the top right, or it's generated email from one of their ticketing systems and it always follows a very similar format. Obviously, in this instance, we didn't have access to that, so we sent just a normal email making it look like we were standing a thing. If that's different from normal, obviously that should raise suspicion and you should say something. Additionally, it's important to understand the different extensions like we talked about for URLs, .com, .training, .org. Your organization, if it's hospital.com, will always be hospital.com. If you see .training or .portal, that's a red flag that you should definitely follow up on. Second, is you need to try to make sure you understand how your organization. Is this normal for them to ask me to type in my password for a new portal? Is it not? Even if it's just you're pretty confident it's right, it doesn't hurt anything to reach out and ask the help desk, hey, is this real? Call them on the phone number not the phone number listed in the email. Another common factor that we will use in social engineering is to try to change not just the ending of the URL, but sometimes we can actually buy, if you're hospital.com, we can buy hospital.com, but H0 hospital, right? So changing the O to a 0 just like you would do in a password. That is really hard to detect, but you can usually see because the 0 is bigger than the lowercase o, right? So just ways to kind of protect yourself and figure out, is this really the website I'm going to, etc. More important than anything else is if this is suspicious, if for some reason this is just a different ask than you're normally used to getting, say something. Again, this attack is most likely not just targeting you, it could be targeting your entire organization. You could be the key to giving the help desk the information they need. So, specifically, if you were to fall for this or even not fall for this and report it, then the help desk can take action. Specifically, if you're not the only person that this got sent to, your help desk can warn others about this email coming in. They may even have the capability to block that email, pull the email out of people's inbox before they can fall for it. Additionally, they can take action. Even if you did fall for it, you might be able to stop the attack right away just by changing your password in that instance. So contact your help desk so they can also reach out to other people who received that email and make all of them change their password. Next, let's talk about if you happen to click on that link. So if you clicked on that link or downloaded that macro-enabled Word document we talked about and opened it, what's important to do is, again, you need to report it right away. Another quick step you need to take is to disconnect your computer from the network. Disconnect from wireless, unplug the network jack from the back, and just leave the computer there. It's really important that you don't try to shut down your computer or try to download something from the internet to try to fix it, some malware remover or whatever it may be from the internet. Because your help desk needs that critical information to figure out exactly what's happening on your computer. So if you were to provide your computer right away, they can look at things like your network connections, etc., and they can say, oh, this is going to this IP address in Russia, let's just block that IP address, and that could have been the end of the attack. However, you can lose a lot of that sensitive information if you take actions. If you shut down your computer, you're going to lose a lot of sensitive information, such as network connections, what processes are running, etc. And that is really critical for your team to be able to understand exactly what's happening and how to stop it. So again, if it's suspicious, say something. If you fell for it, reset your password and disconnect from the network and contact your IT team to take action. Next, let's talk about the internal network. So generally speaking, when we are performing penetration tests for organizations across every vertical, but most specifically healthcare, once we have access to the internal network, it's usually a really quick process for us to be able to elevate our permissions to that of domain administrator or the main IT administrator account, and from there take over the rest of the network. In this particular instance, it was no exception. This is due to a lot of different factors, especially hospitals have a lot of older systems. Your MRI machine might be running Windows XP still. They can't be upgraded because of, whatever reason. It'll cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It will cause the machine to break, etc. And so hospitals have a real challenge on the internal network. This particular case study was no different. We're not going to get into a lot of details about it because it gets a little bit technical, but what you need to know is that once an attacker gains access to the internal network, it's usually pretty easy for us to elevate our permissions quickly and take over the network. In this particular instance, once we took over the network, we gained access to very sensitive information. First and foremost, we logged in as a doctor, because we stole the doctor's password, to PowerChart. At this point, we have obviously had the ability to affect patient care, read sensitive patient information, etc. Additionally, we gained access to the COVID registry patient list. Again, this was performed at the height of the pandemic, and this was one of the key things that we were trying to target. So in this Excel sheet, we had a list of everybody who had COVID-19. We had their name, their medical records, sex, date of birth, exactly when they were admitted, what room they're sitting in, what symptoms they're feeling, etc. Obviously a very sensitive file we wouldn't want an attacker to have. So again, hopefully this provided you a fun way to talk through exactly how somebody might attack a healthcare organization or hospital in this instance, and learn some key things along the way. Biggest recommendations for you: choose a passphrase for your password. Make it strong, personal to you, keep the spaces, keep the punctuation, try to get over 20 characters. It's a little bit of a pain to type it in every time, but it's much more secure. Use password managers. You only have to remember 5% of your passwords. Use a password manager for everything else. Make sure you're protecting that password manager. Turn on multi-factor authentication everywhere you possibly can. That applies both to your personal accounts, things like Twitter have multi-factor authentication. Your bank, anything that you're logging into that you think might be sensitive, let's turn on that multi-factor authentication for exactly the reasons we showed. Finally, when you're seeing social engineering, realize it's not targeting just you. It is vitally important that you report it. It's vitally important that you just have a suspicious attitude towards those. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Check out our booth at the Healthcare Advocate Summit. We'll be there all week. So happy to meet with you guys, talk through some of these different types of attacks we performed. We even have some, quick printouts on how to protect yourself that kind of summarize what we talked about. You can find us on Twitter at TriAxiomSec, or finally, you can email us at info@triaxiomsecurity.com. Thank you very much.